So 11 of you liked this comment. That's good enough for me. Happy New Year! I hope you guys had an awesome holiday season. Well, as good as it can get, considering. But I am so glad you're here and I'm so excited for us to dive into all this content that I've got planned for this new year. No, seriously, I took my entire week off to plan content for the entirety of 2021. It's a problem. Couple of housekeeping things before we dive in. Number one, a big focus for me this year is going to be my Instagram content. I'm really trying to up my game and post more frequently and better content on there, including at least one reel per week. That's my target. That's one of my resolutions this year. So I would love it if you could come check it out. I'm at Swish Creates on there. So if you have an Instagram, come follow me, say hi in the DMs, we can chat, the good stuff. And two, I have completely revamped my Patreon reward tiers. So I've made a lot more rewards available to all of the tiers, including Discord group chats and that kind of stuff. And I've added some new rewards that didn't exist before, such as weekly art tutorials and merch and step-by-steps for all of my paintings and finishing steps, behind the scenes, that kind of stuff. So check all of that stuff out. Link is in the description and tiers start at just $1. So today we're going to talk about my top 3 ways on how to cheat a background. Now, full disclosure, I personally don't believe there is any way to cheat at art, but I know a lot of people might consider these techniques the lazy way out of hand painting every single background detail. Me personally, I see it as peak art efficiency. These tips are super beginner friendly, very easy to implement, and will work with every single painting software that's out there. As always, if you enjoyed this video, then please remember to give me a big thumbs up, hit that subscribe button down below. But now let's dive into my 3 super effective tips on how to cheat a background. Okay, so I've arranged this from the quickest to the most time consuming. So here's the painting that we're going to work with today. It is the Dark Leo piece from the Dark Astrology series, and as you can tell, I've already pretty much painted the character. The entire process from start to finish will be available as bonus content on my Patreon, but I figured you guys would only want to see the relevant bits on here. Okay, let's dive into this list. The first tip, and in my experience the quickest way to piece together a background, is to use matte painting. Matte painting, also known as photo bashing, is when you take a bunch of images and essentially bash them together to create a scene. A lot of concept artists use this technique to quickly fill out scenes, especially repetitive scenes, but don't be fooled by how simple it looks. Matte painting takes a bit of skill and practice to get it right. But before we even start working with photos, it is always good to have a solid idea of the composition and what you're painting into the background. Here you've watched me sketch in a bunch of background details, keeping in mind the crazy perspective as well as the setting. I wanted him in a throne room that is extremely grandiose, maybe overtly so. I of course began with a perspective grid and roughly threw in a throne, some steps, some pillars and curtains and other little details. However, be wary of overcrowding, but that's another topic for another day. So here, as you can see, I've got a bunch of stock images pasted in. I got these off of Unsplash, and I always make sure to only use stock images for this type of thing because you really don't want to infringe on copyrights. And regardless of what type of image you use, copyright or not, always make sure that your work is transformative. What this means is that when I look at my finished painting, I don't want to be able to tell exactly what the source materials were. When it comes to matte painting, there are a couple of core skills that you need to learn. One is the use of layer masks. If you're new to how layer masks work, I highly recommend checking out the tutorials that I have in the description. Layer masks are a super effective and non-destructive way to add photo textures regardless of which technique you use. Because as you can see, I'm able to easily erase the areas of the texture that I don't want, but also bring back the areas that I erased and then decided I do want. Another key skill is perspective. Make sure that, where possible, the perspective of the stock photo matches the perspective of your painting. If not, try your best to warp and distort the photo to make it fit in. It's quite easy to forget this part because a lot of the times we get tunnel vision that keeps us from realizing the fundamental flaws in our work. So this is definitely something to keep in mind. And the third key point with matte painting is to color match. There is a super easy way to do this in Photoshop. First, throw down a bunch of flat colors on the base layer of your painting based on how you want the lighting and color palette to work. Then select your photo layer, go to the image menu, down into the adjustments sub-menu and select match color. It'll open a window that lets you select the document and layer to match the color too. Select your current document and the base layer that you painted in just now. If you look at the preview, you'll see that it tries to match the colors to the layer that you chose. Play with the sliders if necessary and hit OK. Now, you will likely have to go back in and neaten up some areas by painting manually, but matte painting is the quickest, most efficient, and most user-friendly way to throw together a solid background scene. Now, this step still involves photos, but in a slightly different way. Here we're going to add texture to a proper painted layer to really push the realism. And it's going to be a lot more customizable than photo bashing because this time we're going to play around with blending modes. So here, instead of looking for entire photos, we're only looking for textures. Personally, I always go to DeviantArt for this and look for seamless textures and patterns. Here I'm throwing in a texture for the pillars and curtains, as well as his clothing and cape. So I'm gonna paste in the texture for the pillars and clip it to the pillar painted layer. What this does is clip the texture so that it only appears inside the pillar. I also tend to duplicate the texture to form a giant mat of it, and because these are generally seamless, it looks perfectly fine. Next, I'm gonna set the blending mode to soft light. This is probably the one I use most often for photo textures because it is visible but not overpowering. So your painting below still shines through, but so does the texture. And then once I can see through it a little bit, I begin to warp and distort it just like we did with the matte painting. But this time we're distorting it to the form of the surface rather than to the perspective as a whole. Now again, you want to use a bit of discretion here because depending on the light setup, you probably won't see all of the texture uniformly across the entire surface. Plus, sometimes some areas just look messy because of the warping. So I like to just erase off the messy or excessive bits and generally just stick the texture to the midtones and shadows. Another great use for this technique is to add patterns to things like fabric and leather. You've no doubt seen me use this trick a lot, especially when it comes to clothing. I love throwing in little metallic details and design motifs on clothing, some fabric texture on thicker wool, maybe even some scratches on jewelry. With this, however, I do play around with a bunch of blending modes to see which ones work best. And again, always remember to warp and displace the pattern so that it follows with the form of the garment or the jewelry. Alright, it's taken me embarrassingly long to find this technique, but you guys, this has leveled up my art game by about 1000%. And this is the technique of using custom shape selections. So in Photoshop, if you right-click the rectangle shape tool in your tools panel, it'll show you a bunch of other shape tools. Find the blobby looking icon at the bottom of that list that says custom shape tool. This should open up the custom shapes menu up top. You want to make sure that the drop down is set to shape, that it has a fill, the color doesn't really matter, but no stroke. Next, you're going to want to import some custom shapes. There are a ton of these available for all kinds of things, but I mostly use custom shapes for architecture and machine details and all of that technical stuff that I just don't like painting by hand. Here I've collected a bunch of custom shapes, and I think I want to throw some in on both the crowns, maybe some details in the background, even on his sword. I've selected a bright red fill for now, just so it's visible. So once I've picked a shape, I click and drag it wherever I want, then hit enter. I can then distort and warp it to fit the image until I'm happy with the placement. Now, here is where it gets a little advanced, so put your listening ears on. So we're gonna first control click on the layer thumbnail to select the shape, and then we're gonna hide this layer and make a new one. So now you have the custom shape selected in the right place with the right warp and distortion. Now we can grab the right colors and simply paint into this selection. I like to take this a step further by hitting Ctrl H to hide the selection marching ants thing, just because it makes it easier to see. The shape is still selected, I've just hidden the selection outline so that I can better see what it looks like when I paint into the selection. And once you're done, hit Ctrl H to make the selection visible again, then Ctrl D to deselect. You can then delete the original shape layer or maybe warp it further to reuse it somewhere else. I told you this one is the most labor intensive and time consuming, but it is also the most polished technique because you're essentially hand painting the details just with the selection guides on. So your results are going to be way better and way more suited to the painting than photo bashing and using textures that weren't created from scratch specifically for this painting. So here's the finished painting. Again, if you're watching this on Sunday, which is when it goes public here on YouTube, I now have this entire painting from start to finish over on my Patreon. Here we have the fifth sign of the zodiac, Leo. It is a fixed fire sign that signifies leadership, fame, and courage. However, when it goes dark side, Leo has a tendency towards pridefulness and egomania, and it gets very insecure if the spotlight shifts to someone else. Here I've tried to show all of this with a king standing in his throne room. He has essentially slain another king and stolen the crown off the other guy's head. He laughs in triumph because he's just ensured that he's the only one who reigns supreme. I've also added in a ton of lion symbolism in the teeth, the beard, the nails, and the fur around his shoulders, as well as the throne behind him. So if you want to check out the entire process of how I painted the character, including all the finishing steps I took after this video, I have a link in the description. So check that out, support the channel, it means the whole world to me. Alrighty, first video of 2021. Sorted. I hope you guys have found this video useful and entertaining to watch. Let me know by giving me a thumbs up, hitting that subscribe button down below, maybe even leave me a cheeky little comment telling me what you thought of this video. Comment below if there are any other tutorials you'd like for me to cover on this channel and I'll make sure to do it. Come check out my Instagram, come check out my Patreon. I am on there pretty much every day of the week. So yeah, check them out. But with all of that said, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you guys have enjoyed it as much as I have. Check out some more videos up here. I know the outro is a bit different this time around. But yeah, check them out and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye!